Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How's everybody?
I'm good.
Doing all right at the library.
I think Madison says she's joining soon.
Yeah, and one person said they're not going to be able to join because they're sick. So once
Okay.
she joins, we should probably start.
Ooh, let me change my name. I was about to say, I was like, who's Michael?
All right, y'all ready? So I
Yeah,
do
I'm ready.
the
Go
introduce
ahead.
ourselves
Yep.
first. I'll start. I'm Jalen.
I'm Annie.
Hi, Madison.
I'm Jeremy.
I'm Zachary.
So I guess I could read the first question then. So the origin section of Drutman's books, chapters 1 through 4, traces debates about utility and political parties from the framers through the 80s in order to explain how we got to the current state of the crisis in America democratic experiment. Here he discusses the anti-partisans, the responsible partisans, and the bipartisan. What does he identify as the merits and weaknesses of each of these traditional approaches to the paradox of partisanship? For his question, I'm just say a little bit about it. For the responsible partisans, they privilege competition. Um, you can find on page 52. The anti-partisans privilege consensus. It's page 52 as well. And the bipartisan privilege compromise. So I just start with questions like that.
Yeah, I can add, I know like the framers they argued that political parties were dangerous, in fear of dividing mankind to parties, inflaming mutual animosity. That's a quote I took from page 23. Because they acknowledged that parties were beneficial in creating coalitions, so that they could build brands to win elections. However, they um said like at first they needed to form a party to end all parties, which they quoted in 24. But this kind of suggests like the era begins with like the first government. So while like the merits of anti-partisans, like it makes sense because like you don't want too much polarization and too much conflict, but at the same time you kind of need those parties to kind of provide a clear platform and like coalition for policies to be debated and stuff.
Yeah, so what I wrote about that is that with responsible partisanship, like the parties need to make like two distinct choices for the American people because not everyone's going to be studying politics before elections. And I found that on chapter 2, page 3, and that they need to differ enough to where there's two distinct choices that people can make between the parties.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that. I know like the author kind of argues that like a multi-party democracy could help address the paradox of partisanship because it distributes power among different like viewpoints. And compromise wouldn't equal defeat in terms of competition. Like it wouldn't make a zero-sum politics.
And to piggyback off of Zachary, responsible parties are like he says they're essential to modern democracy and like because parties engage citizens and ultimately make democracy both accessible and responsible to the masses. And like with responsible parties, political competition in theory should produce more accountability. So that's why he argues for responsible parties.
Yeah, looking at modern day politics and like around the 80s, um, it kind of makes like a harder choice for the American people with the four-party system. But in today's politics, with how divided the parties are, I feel like it's easier for people to make a choice like at this current time.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, for that question, or for the first question I cited, I think it was page 44, or maybe like the first couple pages of chapter 2. Modern mass democracy requires division and conflict, thus requires that voters have meaningful choices and the freedom to disagree over the relative merits of those choices. And I think it's just a simple theme of Western democracy, life in general, requires some stressors and then appropriate off ramps so we don't get overstressed and stunt our, human development.
Madison, do you want to add anything?
A lot of the stuff that that was already talked about was already mentioned, but I just talked about one of the main concerns being for the responsible party is that there's a bit, or he mentioned, I think on page 53, that there was a bit of a lack of representation. It just says a concern for the responsible partisan is it lacks representation. He states that it underestimates how much two-party democracy is in a separation of powers system, undermines responsible partisanship, and then that well, yeah, that was the end of it, sorry. But that's kind of like what I focused on, or I guess what may have differed from everybody else, but pretty much everything I said was already mentioned.
It's all right. You can move into the next question if you want to start with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. Anyways, if you hear background noise, I'm sorry. But I just said in my mind, bipartisanship is what politics are like supposed to be, if that makes sense, and that compromise should be valued the most. However, I don't think that's necessarily realistic. And so I said that I think responsible partisanship is more of what we see today because there's such a strong value on competition in elections now and how it's very much like winning versus losing. But yeah.
Yeah, I kind of said something similar. I said, in an ideal world, like the best way to describe American politics, is an attempt at responsible politics. Because I don't know, I feel like growing up, like post 9/11, most of us like we didn't really see a lot of bipartisanship. And even when there was, we were probably like babies, so don't remember it. But and the concept of anti-partisanship is like almost unheard of. I feel like nowadays everyone's affiliated with the party. And those who are independent, even then, they still lean one way or another. Um, yeah, that's what I wrote.
I view the parties as like, well, life is essentially like the biggest theme is weighing trade-offs, and sometimes there are easier ones and hard ones. And Republicans and Democrats are essentially like, I don't know, it just plays into the process of like, or of what we want. I cite that politics is the process of getting into positions of government or positions of high responsibility, and government is, running the ship efficiently. And Republicans and Democrats, in effect, act as, forgive my analogy, but government is supposed to be, government and politics is as dysfunctional as we make it out to be. And partly, Republicans and Democrats are of this American social experiment are supposed to be two sagging nuts of the same sack.
So what I wrote about this is that like since the 90s, you can't really see like bipartisanship because of like the rise of Newt Gingrich and the way that like Congress like does its dealings. And I feel like responsible partisanship is more like the way that politics has gone since the 90s, and like anti-partisanship, I only really see that happen like in the founding of the country. You can't really see it like after that fact.
For this question, the analogy that he used was like partisan conflict is to modern democracy like fire was to early human cave dwellers, is essential to life, yet dangerous to survival. And I thought that was just like kind of the right analogy to use for the how would you describe politics today. Honestly, I kind of think it was a little bit of all three because like we have bipartisanship, then we don't. Then we have responsible parties, then we don't. So like, and then we have anti-partisanship. But I think like it's like us, so it's not coming to agreement with the bill or anything like that. So I kind of think we have all three, but I think the best one is bipartisanship because that's like the traditional approach and like how Congress should work with legislation.
I think it's also interesting that you mentioned like it's kind of all three because I could see like the anti-partisan ness, I guess, in terms of like the voting demographics. You hear like so many voters saying like, oh, I don't affiliate with either party because both are corrupt or you know, politics is all just like party based. So I feel like there are a lot of Americans who feel nonpartisan or anti-partisan, sorry. Do you guys want to move to the next question? Okay, Drutman transitions from talking about the recent past in chapter 4 to the present in chapters 5 to 7, arguing that not so long ago in the 60s and 80s, we had a hidden four-party system that prevented the doom he associates with our now cemented, intractable, fully sorted two-party system. What does he say previously? Explain the ability of the two parties to avoid the catastrophic levels of dysfunction that experiences today.
I was point I put out there that he was like, this is like a period of peak performance for Congress. So like and the voting patterns at the time were not predictable and did not follow left and right structures, but instead reflected trade-offs across competing priorities and values, which made space for like fluid collision and across different issues. So basically, Congress at that time was actually getting things done. Yeah, it wasn't just extreme back and forth of I'm right and you're wrong. It was more of a trade-offs and coming together to make things happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. With like the four-party system, like with conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans, like I feel like there was more bipartisanship during that time, and that you can't really see that today with how divided the parties are.
So I use the same exact quote as Jalen on page 86. I just kind of building off of what you said, talked about how there was more people, it was like more because everyone talks about the swing vote and how everybody, is trying to get them to go right or left. But I just kind of talked about how that was a lot more, it's from what it seems like that was a lot more frequent back then and people were less loyal to their party, if that makes sense. But now I think when a lot of the times someone affiliates with the party, they just kind of stick with that. Or if their parents think a specific way or their friends think a specific way, it's just kind of like that's where the loyalty comes from.
I think also this was before like the whole like culture wars and stuff like that kind of you know took place, I guess, in the US. And yeah, kind of what you were talking about, Maddie. I have a quote on page 85 saying conservative Democrats in the South and liberal Republicans from the Northeast often voted with their parties enough to maintain their label, but they voted against their party enough to displease the regulars of like their own party. So I think it's really interesting seeing how like the leadership within Congress was less centralized. And the leaders, they really gave more independence to the committees and subcommittees to develop bills and everything. And back then they also hired like expert staff to help them with these bills. They held like a lot more meetings and stuff like that. Which is like kind of interesting. And also just like voting patterns across like different political issues, they weren't as predictable as they are today. And I think that like unpredictability also contributes to why they were able to work in like a quote unquote like peaceful Congress.
I cite the same quote, and I point to the theme that, well, it could be a little bit more true of Republicans now, but with the particularly with Democrats, I always harken on the theme that like Republicans always have to face one opponent in elections, the Democrats, whereas Democrats have to fight two opponents, the Republicans and themselves. And the divide is between, amongst the Democrats, between liberals versus progressives. I mean, the Republicans have divides in the party against their lawmakers. I mean, I think what's called the Freedom Caucus now versus like Republican classic type of people. But when it matters most, they all unite under one umbrella, particularly under Trump, to uproot democracy. Democrats, particularly liberal, or with lawmakers, I see liberals and progressives uniting over defeating Trump. That's the only major thing, but that's about it. I do not see the divides being resolved amongst liberal and progressive fans because progressivists alienate liberals from leaving a bad aftertaste with them after conversations. Just on, not speaking of government, just like in our social lives. And in
Wait,
some cases,
So, sir, are you answering for question number 2 or number
yes,
3?
too. In some cases, the progressives alienate the liberals running into Trump's arms. And in some cases, I don't blame them one bit.
Well, did anyone else have anything else to add to that question? Okay, we can go to the next one then. What does Dretman mean when he argues that today's crisis has been spurred by the nationalization of identity politics and cultural war politics? I can start off if no one wants to start. Okay. Dretman talks about like the civil rights movement efforts, and how that led to the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 64. In which like actually Republicans were more slightly supported by Democrats. However, after Kennedy beat Nixon in that presidential election, a lot of frustrated GOP members blamed Nixon for being too moderate, and they think they should have gone with Goldwater, who did actually vote against the Civil Rights Act. And so because of this, like the Democratic Party kind of came branded as like the Civil Rights Party, whereas GOP brand themselves as like the opposite. And I think today's crisis has been like spurred by the nationalization of identity politics, because we still have that system in place where the wealthy elites are the new group of activists, and large dollar donors. However, it's still leaving, I don't know, like a whole thing or a big part of identity politics and cultural war politics is, like bringing to light disparities in low income communities or lower socioeconomic statuses, minority groups. And so it's just really interesting seeing how the nationalization of identity politics and cultural war politics is like, in a way, like trying to bring light to issues that were overlooked in the past. However, I feel like with this system and like the wealthy elites are still controlling, or not controlling, but like heavily influencing how elections are, it definitely just adds more to the polarization.
Yeah, I talked about, or building off of that, I talked about how on page 143, Dretman was talking about how he stated that plenty of poor and middle class voters across democracies vote for parties that opposed economic policies that would objectively benefit them. And I thought that was really interesting. And then I kind of just talked about the realignment strategy and how they believe that they think the redistribution would go to undeserving groups, and they focused on ethnic and religious divides, which is a powerful strategy that the rich has used to tame the poor for centuries. But yeah, that's kind of just what I focused on for that question.
For this question, I kind of took like a different approach. I kind of took like the effects of nationalization, identity politics and cultural war politics. But, like the result is that we have now like winner take all elections. And then we have like red versus blue America, and like how all those events and stuff that took place in the 1990s, like it just reduced and redefined partisan conflict. So that's when like things just started changing. Like we kind of reached the point of like no return, because once we reach that point, it's hard to get away from it.
Yeah, see, for this question, I cite, quotes on first page 133. Today, the conflict over national identity is at heart a clash between cosmopolitan and traditionalist values and identities. This is now the conflict now ruling Western democracies. And 142, a broad middle class and rising living standards likewise eat away at support for a left party that promises high taxes and broad redistribution. Yeah, I found the excerpt interesting because a good portion of Democratic fans want their party to run on identity politics as a top priority, like a good portion, but I feel like a vast majority do not. And I fear the Democrats could lose the 2024 election on this issue, and we kind of need them to win badly this November. Because Democrats should be running on inequalities regarding class and like educational divides, because Democrats used to be the party of the little guy, the blue collar workers, working class. And as time went on, more focus was put onto big cities leaving out like Youngstown, Ohio, and towns of that nature.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned like the parties now. Because I think like both parties, they definitely play into identity politics, like maybe one more so like in your face than the other one. Because I feel like the current GOP party, or especially the Freedom Caucus, like they nationalize on the identity of like Christian religion, stuff like that, and traditional values and everything. So it is really interesting seeing how like both identities of both parties like developed so differently.
Yeah, there's a way to like, yeah, that's part of like in political science to win elections using identity politics, to appeal to certain bases. But I mean, I don't cite a government example, but like I think 1 or 2 years ago, Harvard hates Asians, or like they were just, or like for admitting people, they like because too many Asians got into Harvard and they wanted people of all races to get in. And so yeah, that's just a, one of those insanity seats that the Democrats are kind of tagged with. Like your I don't know, your pursuits for fair racial equity, suspend fair inequalities. I don't know, make of that what you will. Plus Harvard's in Boston, that and the city's driving is kind of, shitty. So overlooking more Asians behind the wheel in Boston, yeah, no oversight there. If you get the joke, but
Okay.
Basically what I talked about with this question was like the identity politics of it, and like how like the party split between like rural and urban voters, and the idea that like minorities will go with the Democratic Party and that Republicans are mainly like a Christian right party, and just how that sort of creates a dynamic that splits the country.
Okay, cool. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add before we move on?
No, it just seems like identity politics play more importance and more significance than like cultural politics. Just hearing y'all talk about it.
It's also interesting too, seeing like the rise of identity politics and culture war politics like kind of rise right after the Civil Rights Act. Maybe I could be like dumbing this history down a lot more than it is,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I just think the 2024 election is not, I mean, people are not following most people are not following the politics or government. I mean, they just, maybe the week of election day, look at who's least insane. Hopefully they view Joe Biden as least insane, whereas Donald Trump is, both stupid and crazy. And but it's more like, I don't know, just people have more charity and be less of an asshole, because I know I know common sense is a loosely used term, but to an extent, Democrats or mostly Democrat fans, whether, the most hardcore or casual, just seem to be the party of no common sense, and they don't care about, the ones that are alienated don't care about, like, not voting for Biden is a vote for Trump when they can't pay their rent, or why single mothers going, or if a single mother can't find resolution for their son going through a mental breakdown, stuff like that. It's Democrats are more vocal when they need to be more local. It's about sanctity of the individual. Just the 24 election is on a humanities level, and don't plant the insanity seeds that have people that have Democrats generally on your side, swaying them, wide right towards Trump. And I'd rather keep wide right exclusive to, MAGA and the Buffalo Bills.
did anyone want to read the next question?
I read it. Says, can you think of any examples to support his characterization of today's toxic politics? And or do you think he's overlooked anything important in his discussion of where toxicity comes from? For this question, I kind of didn't really think of anything. Like the examples I thought of was like climate change, drugs, like border crime and cyber issues. And I just think how like we use these big political issues and they become very toxic in politics. So like it's gonna have to be this way or that way, or I'm not going to agree with you propose because it doesn't make sense and just to go with my beliefs. So I think like these issues just become more toxic as we just go back and forth between parties.
I kind of
Yeah.
talked about when we had the conversation in class, where everybody kind of like raised their hand whenever they felt uncomfortable, or like if they've ever felt uncomfortable in class stating their own opinion because it didn't align with the person next to them or someone else. And so that's kind of like what first came to mind when I saw this question, just because it's something that like I've actually, or like I'm pretty sure like all of us raised our hand. We've all experienced, and so that's kind of how I took it.
Yeah, an example I can think of was just like how every tragedy becomes politicized almost, like in a way. I'm like, the example I can think of is like when Joe Rogan claimed that Sandy Hook was like fake or something like that. And so
Alex Jones, not
or Alex Jones, sorry, yeah. Uh and just how like today's toxic politics, it kind of like, yes, like because that awful tragedy happened, like we should, advocate for gun control and everything, but also it's like to the point where people on the other side of the political spectrum are trying to deny or claim like these tragedies never happened, which is like really like kind of, in my opinion, disrespectful to, the victims and their families and everything. And I think also another thing that, to answer the second part of the question, something that he's overlooked in today's toxicity, I think he overlooked the power of social media perpetrating today's toxic politics, especially with how social media's algorithms are kind of set up to just keep feeding you information that you've already liked or already looked at or already engaged with. And so if say you consider yourself a moderate, then all of a sudden you go through down a really super long social media spiral and, they're just feeding you information that just coincides with your beliefs, but maybe to a more extreme view, because that's what gets, the clicks and the likes and the exposure, I guess. Yeah, so I think social media definitely is something that he overlooked in talking about today's toxic politics.
What I kind of looked at is that like when he talks about today's politics, he talks about the fact that with politics today, there's winners and there's losers. And
Mhm.
like I think it kind of divides the nation, and that in a system where people either win or lose the election, that everyone's the loser in the long run because they put so much stock in the election that if they don't win, then they think like everything's over and that the party's done for.
Mhm.
And like, who wants to be the loser in a presidential election? So like,
Yeah, it feels like every election, like democracy is at stake. So
This is the first part of question 3, right? That's what we're on.
that's the last part of the question too.
Last part of question 2.
And also about that social media thing is like, me personally, I never seen like a Trump advertisement for as long as I've been on social media. So like that plays a fact into like the characterization and like you guess you say citizens, how they believe, who they support, because like you don't always see both sides of
Mhm.
the
Uh,
playing field.
Or just final thing too. I actually remember seeing a 60 Minutes piece. There was this guy named Tristan Harris, and he revealed a feature called brain hacking. So essentially take like Instagram or Twitter and think of it as, a slot machine in Vegas. Every time you pull that handle, every time you scroll down, you're trying to get your fix for notifications. And it's just a race to get to the bottom of the brainstem, the attention economy. And I think there's a there's a saying in tech that if you are not buying the product, then you are the product. Because the advertisers are the customers and the product is your eyeballs viewing the stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Do you guys want to move on to the next question?
Yeah, I'm good.
Sure.
Um, Chapter 7 discusses the normative importance of fundamental democratic norm of shared fairness in a healthy democracy before chronicling some of the modern threats to that norm that create what he calls a doom loop, a reinforcing feedback loop, a death spiral. What are some of the violations of this norm of shared fairness that Dretman finds so deleterious? I don't know how to pronounce.
The two days, I think.
Sorry.
I think it's like, never mind, never mind. You said you good.
Okay, to the legitimacy of democracy, and why does he think that their existence leads to a vicious cycle that can only be broken by drastic measures?
I just want to put out there on page 160 is like the winner take all stakes of toxic politics have activated like a us versus them mindset that like justifies like more aggressive action. So like I think like one of the chapters like something like Hillary said if they go lower, we go lower, something like that. Along those lines, like it's like one party want to do one thing, you have to do it something back just
Yeah,
to get
I think the quote was if they go high, or if they go low, we go higher, or something like that. That was from the 2016 election. Yeah.
and my point is like it's hard to break that cycle once you get in that loop of like get back and revenge and like I need my power, you can't take it away from me type stuff.
I talked about how on page 171 that he states that democracy lies on fairness, but we can't agree on what's fair and what's not fair. And then I tied that in with gerrymandering. And how I think on page 160, it states that Republicans think that it states that Republicans believe Democrats have made America more radical and have abused their power for a long period of time. Therefore, when they do that, it's justified. And then I just finished it off with on page 161, David Lewis, which I believe was a North Carolina Republican representative. It states that I drew this map in a way to help foster what I think is best for the country. And so I think I just stated that this was another piece of evidence that gerrymandering is used to help the Republican Party, but like I didn't ignore that Democrats do that too. But I was just like, this is just proof that it is occurring, and that because one party does it, someone else is going to start doing it, and that ties in with the doom loop.
I also talked about gerrymandering for this question, and then I also brought up the fact about voting laws on chapter 7, page 8, and it creates a system in which the lower class cannot vote when there's not early voting times because they can't get off work, and the fact that in Republican states there's harsher ID laws to be able to vote, and it kind of creates like a spiral where like the lower class can't vote as much as people that are in the higher class and have more time off and stuff.
Yeah, I also talked about election laws and stuff like that. I focus more on like the confirmation of election results. And obviously each state has their own different election rules and how they um function and stuff. But it's also like kind of hard to have that fundamental democratic norm of shared fairness when each state's election rules are so different. And because of that, that would most likely lead to like some sort of change or whatever, or at least like create some sort of mistrust or distrust in voters themselves when it comes to election results, seeing how each election is done so differently. And I feel like a like major example I could think of was just like the violations of the norm of shared fairness that happened on January 6th. Because January 6th was kind of done to stop the confirmation of the election results. Um and I think also like at the time, like political figures like not denouncing extremist groups who did perpetuate January 6th also fed into that as well.
Yeah, Donald Trump was the first president in American history to interrupt a peaceful transfer of power. The one thing that, or that's been an that was America's feather in their cap for 200 plus years, that so many other nations maybe tried pulling off but failed. And we had a good record until January 6th.
And just to like add on to that, it's like Drummond's point that we all find ways to justify our actions. So like with the January 6th, Donald Trump, he just find ways to justify his actions. Like he quotes, the more we believe the other side's playing dirty, the more we are likely to believe our side has a moral imperative to fight back. The more radical, evil, or extreme the other side, the better our side seems in comparison. Sure, we might have to fight a little dirty, but we know we are right. When everything's at stake, the end justifies the means. That's on page 165.
Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add?
I guess let me add one more thing. I guess most of my commentary has been more culture than government, but it's kind of hard to, separate the two when talking about politics, but as is. But I just remember in my, let me see what I wrote. I wrote down in my thing. Republicans produce fans that like, or just culturally Republicans fans generally produce someone that you want to have a beer with, but you don't necessarily want to run a large institution. I'd say a guy that would fit that profile would be like Elon Musk. There's a mad genius to him, but also like, why does he have to do half the negative crap that he has to do? And then Democratic fans, and political identity doesn't have to be like the most, the heaviest weight of humans, because humans are complex layered. But Democratic fans typically, you'd want them to handle like more difficult stuff, and you could trust them better with handling more difficult tasks, but have this bad social aftertaste and insufferable graft to them that makes you not want to be with them. Maybe at times punch them in the face, just on a social level. But
Okay, we can move on to the next question. We weren't required to read chapters 8 to 10, but in other parts of the text, you allude to the number of potential solutions that you may be familiar with. 3 of these ideas adopt or involve the following: A, adopting a ranked choice voting, B, expanding the size of the House, C, eliminating congressional primaries. Based on what you know about these ideas, do you think any of them could help restore the norm of shared fairness that Drutman deems is so crucial to our electoral democracy's health, and why? Um, does anyone want to start? If not, I can also start if you want.
Yeah, I could start if you want.
Okay.
So I don't think Congress would be able to run as it does now if there were 1,000 more members in the House, because of the fact that it would give so much power to like subcommittees that it would run completely differently than it does now. And the fact that they can't pass anything now, I don't think 1,000 more members would change that fact. And also, if we were to expand the House, like how far away are we from like changing the Senate as well? Because the Senate would have so much more power because of how many people they represent compared to the House.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, another thing that I talked about, Zach, that I know you touched on, about like expanding the House. I think like ideally it would be a good idea like on paper, but I don't know if it would be the best at decreasing polarization. Just because like say we do expand the House, right? We still have that centralized leadership structure within the House already. So when it comes to like deciding who's the minority speaker, who's the whip or whatever, I feel like that would just like there would be a lot of growing pains. I feel like, and I think also a lot of taxpayers would complain saying like, why do we need to expand Congress when, my taxes already go to my current rep who isn't doing anything. So, um, yeah, I definitely see like a lot of backlash on that.
I kind of talked about ranked choice voting and how I think it could restore fairness because it expands the ability to have a multi-party system. And then it also, I don't know if like this would actually happen, but it kind of helps people become more familiar with the candidates that they're voting for. But I don't know if this is realistic. So
I
Yeah.
also talked about that too, about like can't or voters trying to educate themselves on candidates. I don't know if that would be feasible. Like if there are more than just like 2.
I really don't think any of these approaches will like help restore the normal share of fairness. I mean, I thought like each one had like little bit things that might work in like minimal ways. I thought like ranked choice voting just like it would just help reduce wasted votes and like eliminate the need for multiple elections. And like it just with ranked choice voting, you could determine a candidate with a strong support instead of just having like the other electoral college and stuff like that. But I really don't think none of these really could help restore the share fairness. We're so far from that already.
Yeah, no, I agree. I also wrote like they could pose benefits. However, I do not see the US implementing them without major backlash from the general public. Uh, I also talked about a little bit about the eliminating congressional primaries. I could see the benefit in doing that because it would help lessen the socioeconomic gap between Congress and the average American so that like more like average Americans could actually run for Congress and they don't need, like a buttload of money to make it on the, like ballot if they were to have a primary. But at the same time, I feel like it would still like we still have the wealthy elite influencing elections. So I feel like that wouldn't really help much in the long run.
But do you think the average American would run for Congress if they could? I don't know.
I think it depends on the area. I know like in Virginia at least, like there's a lot of people who run for like the primaries within their party, but typically that party already has their like main candidate already in mind. If that makes sense. But that also is a really good question. Like me personally, I would not want to run for Congress. That sounds awful.
I think I can answer your question. Yes. I mean, I could definitely, you just need the suit, tie, fake smile, and you're good to go, just learn the skills on the job. I could definitely see like, Chris Evans' character in Knives Out playing a perfect politician. Or something to that effect. Or whether it's that or. Because you know, Hollywood actors can become president now. And
Are we ready to move on? Question 4. The introduction of the book includes a section called Why I Wrote the Book. Drummond writes that when I see dysfunctional systems, I always think there ought to be a better way. He presents his credentials by reminding us that he's a political junkie, and later in chapter 2, he tells us other political scientists in the 1940s and 50s who saw a problem with the way Americans party operated. However, he argues in hindsight, their solution actually exacerbated today's crisis that he seeks to fix. Given this admission about ability of political scientists of past, how much weight do you think we should give Drummond's own arguments? Just to put out there, I think we should really consider his arguments. I mean, he has really valid points in my opinion. Even though it might like be hard to implement his solutions, but like when you talk about like the era of toxic partnership is very prevalent. Like the current trajectory of American politics we're going to, we won't continue to get worse every years, and like division is very increasing, is keep growing, and everybody's essentially being forced to pick a side. As a nation, we're moving like farther and farther apart due to the nationalization of identity politics and cultural wars.
I agree, Jalen. I kind of talked about how he does have a really good view on how politics works today, but I mean, hindsight is 2020. Like, we don't know how American politics is going to like develop in the next like 20 years or so. So, like, I feel like he does make good arguments about the issues of American politics today, but I don't. He does give solutions, but I don't know if those solutions are going to pan out or change the way that politics runs today.
Yeah. I just talked about how I agree with both of you that he makes a lot of valid points, but a lot of things are circumstantial. So he kind of talks about how like Madison, Washington, like they hated party so much, but it's kind of their fault. And I was like, sure, but I don't even know if I answered this question right. I kind of had a hard time with it. I was just like, I think parties would have happened anyways because people would have just started identifying or started grouping with people that they share beliefs with. Like that's human nature. And I kind of talked about I don't know how much weight I would give to his arguments, even though I think that like he does have a good view on politics today. I don't know how long. Like it's always changing, so you never know what we're gonna see in the next like 40 to 20 or 40 to whatever years. I don't know, like in the future.
Anybody else have anything to add to that first part of the question?
I can add a little bit. I was saying like I feel like Drummond's arguments are strong enough to stand on their own, at least until another scientist falsifies his arguments. I feel like his arguments are based on like information we have today, which makes or helps supports his arguments to be valid. Even when he was talking about like the framers and how they were arguing for anti-partisan government, he was saying the framers believed anti-partisanship was crucial at the time only because they didn't have as much information as we have now today. So like with the information we have now today, we know that anti-partisans are less likely to gain political power. So I forgot who mentioned it. I know everyone kind of touched on it a little bit, like we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know what will shift and change and what events will help shape our country and stuff. Like I'm thinking, for example, like no one probably could have guessed 9/11. But I know that changed our government and like its history like very drastically. That's all I had.
yeah, I guess just like with government or any other institution or authority, humans just generally don't like buying into flawed systems. Flawed, and I say flawed in this case, meaning things we don't entirely like or trust. I mean, yeah, we hate tribalism, but in the end, you do, there is some benefit to aligning with a tribe to achieve, greater goals. So.
We can move into the second part. Like, do y'all buy his argument that his problem is serious? Um, I said yes. Kind of like based off this quote that in page 172, like everybody blames the government, and then the parties blame each other, and division increase, and the stakes feel higher. Like the parties double down on national identity questions that divide them, raising the stakes further, and so on and so on. So a series of escalating and reinforcement do loops, recycling the toxicity back into the system. So like this do loop is very prevalent in government. So I think the argument is very serious. Like the problem is very serious. And essentially something's going to happen that we needed to address it, regardless of what you believe.
I would say for this question, yes, because it's painstakingly difficult to resolve societal problems at a mass scale, hence why people don't trust in government. But also you do need a little bit of and even though like a good portion of the population believe government is a scam or whatever you will, you do need a little bit of the population to believe that the institution of government still works or wants to work with it, despite and it still does, despite its unnecessary graft. I remember there was a senator named Patrick Moynihan, and the common quote that people cite is, "Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts." When I say today, outside maybe the court of law, we have kind of sailed past that point in the age of Trump, because we are in a pro-truth, screw your facts culture. That makes sense. George, I don't know if you guys know comedian George Carlin, but one of his famous quotes was, "When you are born in any other country, you're welcome to the freak show. And when you're born in America, you get a front row seat." Everyone believes there's truth to that saying, but vehemently disagree on who the targeted freaks are. Is it the Palestine protesters, BLM, MAGA, the horny guy at the party, middle class white families? I'm not sure if that makes sense, but
It does.
My answer was pretty brief for this. I just talked about how I do buy his argument, that the problem is as serious today. If not, it's worse due to social media. I know we talked about that earlier. I was just talking about how like I wasn't super involved in politics until probably 3 years ago. And have just noticed a lot of polarization, and how after reading this, like this is definitely a very real thing.
Yeah, I also agree with Jalen Madison. I also said that like the problem polarization is as serious as Drutman describes. I know like recent Congresses, they've reached like record levels of like super low legislation passability rates, meaning like the House has been so polarized they haven't been able to really like work together, excuse me, and get enough votes to pass a bill to the Senate. And I think also like the polarization, it's like manifesting itself in different ways that we didn't realize, or I guess like the framers didn't realize would. One example I gave was the unelected branches of government as seen through the Supreme Court, like just the Supreme Court nominations. It's such like a politicized game when it comes to nominations nowadays. And even with just the example I can think of is when like RBG died. And like her dying wish was that she wouldn't be replaced until like the next president was elected, whoever it may be, because she did pass away towards the end of Trump's term. However, like Mitch McConnell was very adamant on, nominating someone and getting the Supreme Court. However, 4 years prior to that, there was an open spot during Obama's administration, and he said that he wouldn't fill, or like that spot wouldn't be filled until the next president would be elected. And so it's kind of crazy seeing how like the polarization is manifesting themselves and the Supreme Court especially, just because it's, you can see like obviously with like a lot of different presidents being overturned and stuff like that, how the polarization is leaving like long lasting effects for generations.
Yeah, and I would, or to piggyback off of that, I say Democrats' election strategies typically focus on, winning seats in the House and the Senate, whereas Republicans, they keep their eye on the ball with the Supreme Court. And I think I do recall in 2015 when Obama was president, like well, forgive me if this is a bit inartful, but between 2015 to 2020, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, yes, a great justice, but the plan with her, with people being concerned on her age, was that we were banking that she didn't die. And Obama in 2015 pulled her aside to, essentially say, hey, that Supreme Court, that's kind of an important place, or just to think about retirement, to properly replace her with a liberal justice. Because when Trump became president, we got 3 conservative Supreme Court justices. And with our 2024 election, we've kind of ignored that, obviously there's the Biden age thing. And we don't want Biden to become Ruth Bader Biden.
So what I talked about with this is that I do see that there are problems today and that they are quite serious to some degree, with the fact that what he talked about with like politics being a win-lose game now, and like looking at the 2016 election in which like the Electoral College kind of stole the election away from Hillary, and the 2020 election where Trump pleaded fraud in the election, like it it really separates the country into people that think that they won the election when they actually didn't.
Um, do y'all think any of his pro solutions would work if enacted? Like, do y'all think it's realistic to talk about these proposals, and why? Uh, I just said it's unrealistic to talk about these proposals with the current state of government and politics. My whole thing is like I think we strongly need like an event that's bigger than January 6th to have anything change in the government. So I think like we need like some crazy event that nobody could think of to happen to have any kind of type of change with government to end this like polarization and era of toxic politics and everything. So that's my big point.
Yeah, I agree with Jalen. I kind of said like while the pro solutions in ideal world could fix the problems, I like realistically don't think that they like A would either be enacted or like I said, like they would not be enacted or at least not without a major reform or major event that would take place. Kind of like what you were saying, Jalen. And I was saying like I doubt either party would give up their like financially like very strong institutions that help promote candidates in their party across different levels of government. Like I highly doubt Congress would like not get rid of that, but I doubt that they would agree enough to vote to expand the House. I just don't see that happening. And in addition, I think like if the proposals were enacted, like I could see a lot of institutional errors that like people would overlook take place, such as like gerrymandering. Because if you were expanding the House, you would have to create smaller districts, and I could see gerrymandering being a big issue. In addition, with like technical issues about installing ranked choice ballots, I could see a lot of people being confused on how that even works and everything. Kind of like we saw with the 2000 election with the butterfly ballots. And I think eliminating the congressional primaries, it doesn't eliminate the like power that money has in winning elections. I feel like the root issues are still very much there.
Yeah, I talked about how I also agree that his proposed solutions, if they were enacted, they could work, but it's not necessarily realistic, specifically ranked choice voting. But I did bring up how I don't think it's like, so I don't think it's gonna happen, but I don't think it's entirely unreasonable if people started talking about it just because, and I could be wrong, but I feel like we talked about it in class how we have this has been successful in other countries, and I think it was Australia. And so if we started picking up those ideas, like it could work. I don't think it's gonna happen now or anytime soon. But maybe down the line it could happen.
No, I agree. Like I could see them like trying to implement it and stuff, and I feel like it would take like the first generation to like, do ranked choice voting to kind of get all the like growing pains and mistakes out of the way. Like that period would be kind of hellish, but I feel like I could see it, you know, becoming the new standard, new norm for like generations in the future when they vote.
Yeah, just as humans, we are typically bad at advancing civilization at a slow rate and consistently. I mean, society advances at the rate of an impacted colon. And I would say, or for this last question, maybe, but generally no. Resolving, societal and social problems at a mass scale, like what I said earlier. It's best to resolve it on an individual basis, not through institutions. I mean, just your closest friends, local, not vocal. I think the Democrats going to know that with the 2016 election. But besides that, I think one major, like I said, I believe the 2024 election is just, will be one, don't drive other people insane. And I think we don't prioritize the sanctity of the individual. Like don't limit your individual potential to immutable characteristics unless you absolutely know you have a flaw that you have to live with the rest of your life. Like in my case, I have autism. That's going to be something that I'm living with for the rest of my life. And I'm afraid our mainstream society refuses to work with the sanctity of the individual by recasting personality differences as a chiaroscuro of dysfunctional well-being.
Yeah, so I agree with the point that expanding the Congress would actually be a bad move. But honestly, I think that ranked choice voting could create a better system in which we vote so that everyone's voice can be heard, like in our democracy.
Plus, I wouldn't know how you would expand the like in the House, like where could you put more seats, like in the House chamber or something like that.
Yeah, build them.
I was just thinking logistically too, expanding the house would most likely mean like new buildings would have to be built in DC, if I'm not mistaken. Like say if the house was like 1,000 people. And I know that would be like a lot more taxpayer money coming out of like the average American's pocket. And I know a lot of them would be not happy about that.
Yeah, it's difficult to build things in DC already, or just in that area.
Was it the
Uh,
last question?
yeah. Any other thoughts about this book? Did y'all like it? Or the chapters? I
It
thought the
was
book was
definitely
alright.
more, it was definitely the most simplest to understand. Like I did, forgive my language, jack shit on the Al Gore thing, so this was better and simpler to understand.
I liked it, just because they were able, or you could tell it was like written pretty recently. So, because I feel like a lot of the readings we do for, I'm not talking about like this class, but just like for our poli sci classes in general, it's usually like super old, tiny, like sometimes hard to read, using like historical examples from like years and years and years ago. So, it was kind of cool reading uh, a political theory book, but applying it to modern day politics.
Anybody got any last comments? I think if you don't, I think we are good to wrap up.
Nothing else.
So I guess that's a wrap. It was nice to meet y'all.
Yeah, nice meeting you all virtually. I don't think I think I've met some of you in other groups, like probably at the beginning of the class. I think I had, yeah, one group with you, Madison, but I don't think I've had groups with any other people in the group. So yes, nice meeting you all virtually.
Yeah, nice to meet you guys.
Well, I'll see you guys Thursday. Right, we have class, I'm assuming. I think it can.
Yeah.
We don't have an assignment due, right?
Nah,
So no. Not that I
no,
see.
I don't think she gives us assignments after the Booker Podcast Club. Or at
Okay.
least that's what I think. Because I don't remember doing homework after the first book club and then podcast club.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
and typically the readings are like pretty comprehensive. And yeah, just doing it after a book club or whatever. It'd be like I remember like the first couple assignments that we had, just I don't know, so many lines of stuff to read through. So yeah.
All right, I'll see you guys then. It was
All
nice
right.
meeting you.
Bye.
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 Goodbye, don't die.